Hi, and welcome to part two of Infinite Hope's podcast, Exploring Sexual Violence. Today, we're going to hear from client B, who has bravely agreed to share their journey. I've anonymised their details, as I did with client A, to ensure that they are free to express and share their opinions without other people recognising who they are. You're about to hear the interview, and I really hope that it helps those who are looking to make sense of their experience and gain an understanding of where and how to get support. Thank you for tuning in. If you've listened to part one, client A's journey, we're going to ask the same questions to client B and C, and you're about to hear that now. If you are struggling, then please reach out for help and support.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I think it's really important that we get as much experience as we can out there that's real, lived, honest, true reflection of what it's actually like to go through this. Obviously, it's Sexual Violence Awareness Week, and I think it's important that every survivor has their own voice out there and not just as professionals saying what we think should happen. So I'm going to ask you a series of questions and we can go from there, and if there's anything you want to share afterwards, you can as well. Is that all right?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, so did you recognise your experience of sexual violence immediately after it had happened?
No, I only realised it was incorrect behaviour. I wasn't able to make that connection and recognise it as sexual violence. I think the way that I began to understood what what was actually happening is by talking about it to people, and in a sense getting that validation from other people, because I couldn't come to that conclusion myself. It was too scary to come to that conclusion. I don't think there was such an awareness of what it actually is, which is why I wasn't able to put it into that sort of a category. I think when I was speaking to people about it, I got some concerning looks, and I think that's what triggered me to think, like, okay, that's not right. And should I really just brush over this, or should I actually understand what has happened here? And then also the whole point of not wanting to talk about it or revisit anything, that is also a sign that it's not correct. Like, that there's something going on here, or something that has happened that I probably do need to look at and recognise what it actually is.
Yeah, that sounds really tough. I mean, that having that feeling is incorrect behaviour, but also not being able to name it and then trying to make sense of it from talking for other people, I think is really powerful. To be brave enough is also to sort of think something's not quite right, but I'm going to have a chat. I'm just wondering, do you think that we classify things too strictly? Do you think there's almost like this idea of what sexual violence is, and therefore sometimes we don't expand enough so that people can understand their experiences? Is it too strict in its boundaries of what we think things are?
I believe the way that people perceive things is the way that they are taught things. If you perceive it as purely like a physical form of an act that is a physical form, then you're immediately going to classify it as that. If you see it as an emotional form, you're immediately going to classify it as that. Whereas I think sexual violence as a term is quite a broad subject. It covers many different areas. In my head, it's always linked to physical.
Mm-hmm.
And it's understanding, for me, it was understanding that actually it's not just that, it's everything else encompassed in that. And yeah, that's where I sort of started to connect the dots and realize, in a way.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds really tough again of that, if you haven't had it taught as an emotional experience, not understanding the impact. And I'm really glad that you separated them out, because I find sometimes people will understand the physicality of it really well, but not understand why emotionally and mentally the load of it, of going through something that is under that umbrella of sexual violence, which is very broad, is so hard to piece together and reconcile that these things have happened, because your body can tell you one story, your mind can tell you something else, and your emotions are doing something different. So trying to marry that together is really tough, isn't it?
100%. I even, I thought back to the situation upon, sort of thinking about this subject topic. And I thought, you know what, when things were happening, I felt it in my body. Like you just said, you feel it,
Mm.
but you don't necessarily understand what it is. You don't recognize, you can't pinpoint and say, okay, I feel like this because of that. And drawing that connection actually helps you to understand what's going on in your body and how to maybe manage it, or what needs to happen for you to get through, or, you know, carry on with life at the end of the day.
Yeah, and you
Um,
said that often it was the concerning looks from people that made you think, oh, this is something else.
yeah.
Did you find it helpful to have that as a response, or did you feel judged? How did you feel in the moment when that was going on? Because that must have been tricky as well.
I didn't necessarily feel judged by all the people that I spoke to about it. I think there may have been um, maybe one conversation or maybe two conversations I had that I did get that feedback, but that immediately made me drew my walls up. It was a negative sort of response. But from the people who gave me concerning looks, it was more often than not people who sort of had my best interests at heart, and they wanted to make sure that I was okay. Primarily, like above all else, it's not about what you've done. It's more about what's happened to you and how it's affected you. And the concerned look is more from a place of love, and a place of like, I want you to know that I am there for you, even though I don't know what to do right now. Like, I can see that something's not right here, and I want you to know that this isn't right, in a sort of soft approach. Obviously, a concerning look is kind of, it's on my face. This is the truth. Um, so for me, it's good that people are honest in that sense. Yeah, honesty is the best policy.
And that must have been a relief almost to know that people were there and concerned, but not pressuring or judging, but just sat with you.
Yeah.
Did that? Do you think that made it easier then to determine that what you'd been through was sexual violence?
It, I don't think the connection was drawn that quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I think it definitely led me in the right direction to understanding what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
Because in my mind it was just a bad incident or a bad couple of things, um, which needed to be addressed but just didn't want to be addressed. So I don't think it was a case of that happened and then that made me realise what it was. It was more of a that happened, then I was then enabled to be more open about it and want to understand it more.
Absolutely. And the reason I've asked this question to all of you is because I think there is this real demonstration in the media of people understanding immediately that something terrible's happened and it falls under a crime or the umbrella of sexual violence. And I think we need to really be careful what we're saying about victims here, because again the onus is on the victim to realise something's wrong, and that feels quite hard to swallow when it's them that have been through the experience. So I guess I want to kind of get that real lived experience to so people understand that if they don't immediately walk away from a situation, or in their recovery from a situation, if they don't feel like that, there's some difficult labels which I'm not going to mention, but I will mention in the pre-interview part, with a trigger warning. Some pretty difficult labels that we associate with sexual violence, and if it doesn't neatly fall into that box, I think we are, you know, okay to take our time and work out our experience and work out what happened. But I think
Yeah.
it's a societal message like, well, or you don't, and I just don't think it's that simple.
I do think it's quite dangerous to also classify things, because
Yeah.
it may not just be that one thing, it may be an amalgamation
Mm-hmm.
of different things that happened that actually maybe even resulted in something else. Like, I think it is very dangerous to classify as one thing or another. I think you need a broad understanding of what all of, like, the grey areas are. Like, nothing's ever black and white. If it was black and white, the police wouldn't have a job. It's like there would be no police force, because it would be either jail or not, kind of black and white situation. There's a grey area, and you need to understand that it's what happens in that grey area that it needs more education, I think.
Absolutely. And I think, you mentioned before the emotional side of this, and this is really important because, I will throw some stats in eventually into this podcast, but I'm not going to give you them right now. The fact is that most people will know their perpetrator or have a relationship with their perpetrator. So in that sense, there is no black and white. There are emotions involved, however they look. So I think
Yeah.
it's really important that, I prefer the umbrella term of sexual violence rather than one label or another, for the same reason that classification is quite difficult. But I think that, it's never black and white. And we don't talk about the emotions involved, because if you're having a relationship of some kind, even if that's a friendship or, someone you go to work with or whatever it is, that kind of relationships, or you've been to school with, etc., you have automatic emotions around what's happened. And sometimes those are the things that keep you stuck. So I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, definitely.
So did you know sort of, or when did you decide, I guess, to reach out for help and support? What was the kind of catalyst to do that?
So, for my personal experience, it was when I thought it started affecting my relationship. And at the time, I didn't know how to reach out for support. I didn't understand that I needed to, in all fairness. But I think the sort of catalyst was that things started getting tough for me in the relationship at the time. And I thought, you know what, maybe there is something that I can do to understand what has actually happened to me. Because I think it is obvious from other people's point of view, because they know me and they know that I'm not actually myself. But for me, I'm sort of coasting through, I'm ignoring what's going on, because it's easier to do that. It's easier to just put up and shut up. It's easier to put it to the back of your mind, compartmentalize, and just carry on with life as if nothing happened. So it's obviously it's definitely a brave thing to do, to be able to realize that you need to reach out for support, because no one else can really do that for you. You've got to be in a place where you're ready to accept support.
I think that's such an important point, and I think it is courageous, because you know that when you reach out for support, there are going to be things you're going to need to say, even if
Yeah.
they're an outline or an overview or the headlines, as I like to call it. And I think there's a difference between surviving and thriving. And I think, after events like this, you survive, you have to, your body takes over, your brain goes into automatic drive. But
Yeah.
actually, you're not thriving, you're not living a full and meaningful life, because there are parts of you that are closed down, understandably so. But that
Yeah.
feels quite an important thing to say, that no one else can know but you when it's time to reach out for support, because I think also you have to do it for yourself. It has to be part of your recovery.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. If you maybe, I think in my situation, I felt that it was doing myself an injustice by hiding this thing that had happened. I think I got to the point where I realized, you know what, you're probably going to be stronger for it if you do reach out in the long term. And
Absolutely.
that was a bit of a catalyst moment for me, thinking, okay, in 10, 20 years' time, where am I going to be if I take this route? Where am I going to be if I take this route? And long story short, I thought I'd be better off if I did speak about it.
Which is great. So did you know where to get help and support from? Was it obvious where to reach out to?
I'm laughing, but no. Um, reason I laugh is because I, the first thing that I thought was, who on earth do I talk to about this? Because in my head, it's a grey area. For one, I have never, not that I've never been educated on it. I know that there are means and ways that people seek support, but for, like we said earlier, that categorical incident or incidences, it's more like, okay, if this has happened to you, this is who you call. If this has happened to you, this is what you do. Whereas if you're in that grey area, and sexual violence being a broad term, what do you do? And who do you reach out for support? What kind of support do you need? You don't know that. You
Yeah.
definitely don't understand what you need. And the fact that where I was working at the time wasn't advertised at all. I work in a very male dominated industry. And it, even that in itself is quite difficult, because it's then, what do people perceive? How do people perceive you?
Yes.
will you be supported in this, or will people see you in a way that, like, oh, you're just causing trouble? um I think it kind of didn't give me any confidence to speak out. The surroundings and the people that I was probably surrounded by, I did have. I think at the time I had good line management, but at the same time, the wider workforce wasn't as encouraging in that sort of sense. I even felt like in the office there was quite derogatory terms, or like derogatory feeling around a woman walking into the office, and that in itself just doesn't give you the confidence to want to speak out. Um, so in terms of like knowing who to go to or where to go, I I was at a loss. I think what I did do is reach out to pastoral support, in the form of like a padre, so someone who will keep something anonymous, um, and you can talk to about things in your own time, with no judgment, in a safe space. I think it's quite a nice stepping stone in a way, because they also have those links to direct
Yeah.
you in good direction. Yeah.
I think, we don't do enough as a society to signpost people into where to
Yeah.
get help and support. And I think you made a really good point there that, you know, particularly in male dominated environments, the truth is the stats show that some of those men will be victims themselves of sexual violence. But we
Yeah.
should be thinking outside the box about how do we educate and inform and support organisations where they are heavily male dominated, to
Yeah.
also recognise that there will be people there that may be male or identify as male. Because the other thing is we have to be careful on gender in terms of workforce anyway. I think, again,
Yeah.
there's stereotypes around gender, isn't there? But we need to be
Mm.
doing more, I think, to say if someone, whoever they identify, whatever their gender, needs support, this is how they access. And it's things for me
Absolutely.
that are missing, like toilet door posters that say you can call this place, you can do that, that not everywhere
Yes.
has. So I think we could do more as a society to provide that and
Yeah.
not wait for someone else to. I think we're very good at going, well, the NHS have got this bit, rape crisis centres have that bit, social services have this bit, but we're not very
Yeah.
good at going, well, as a society and a workforce, what can we do to support people who
Yeah.
are going to be going through? Statistically, we all have jobs, we're going to be going through something like that in a workforce.
Yeah.
So, and if people are currently not in employment, there might be more mechanism in the job centre or places they access for people to be trained. Whereas I
Yeah.
think some workforces just turn a blind eye or see it as a social situation they don't need to be involved in. But
Yeah.
I think if it's directly affecting your employees, which is going to because of the stats, there
Yeah.
are going to be times where you're going to have to, be proactive. And I think it's sad to feel you got to this place where you were ready and it felt right, and then it was like, oh God, where do I go now? I've got
Yeah.
these feelings. So that must have been really challenging.
Yeah, I think the support that I received from the people that I did reach out to ultimately led to more support and more people that could help. And I think it's just starting making those connections. I've I've been through a bit of a work journey at the moment as well, and the most important thing that I've learned is being connected to different people. Networking is key. It's never what you know, it's who you know. And I think that transpires into absolutely every aspect of life. In this situation, it wasn't what I knew, it's who I knew. And those people can point you in the right direction, which is so important.
Which is great. And I think, that networking connection is obviously what we need to do more of. I
Mm.
think in terms of whole force workforce and thinking
Yeah.
about, well, actually, does everybody know that there's a padre? Does everybody know there's pastoral support? Because if you don't, we need to do more about that. So I think
Mm.
there's things that as a society we have responsibility for, not just to say, well, if you're a victim of something, you have to take the responsibility to find this. This should be readily available.
That's a good, really good point. I thought just then, if you spin the situation on your head, let's say you are managing like an organization or how things happen, you've got to think, what if this was to happen to you?
Yeah.
What would you do? And if you can't figure out what you would do in that situation because you physically do not know, then you need to do something about it and put in steps in place for the people who are going through it and have not got this place of, managerial power. to, put, I can't explain myself right now, but put things in place like a triage system, maybe,
Yeah.
of support. I think it's very important that everyone looks at this and thinks, okay, what if it was me?
And
What
I
would I
think
do?
that's a great idea, because it doesn't matter the size of the company. That it doesn't matter if you're a
Yeah.
huge company, a medium, or a small company. If you've got
Mm.
employees, you have a duty of care to think about things that might occur, and
Yeah.
it's always things that might not have happened to you, or you might
Mm.
have loads of awareness on but don't know how to support. So I think you've
Yeah.
got some really good points there. So changing direction a little bit,
Yeah.
what do you think the best and the worst things are about therapy?
I think therapy is fantastic. Best thing that's happened to me this year, along with the fact that I don't know, I'm going through a bit of a journey at the moment, so therapy is just really helping on that journey. Um, it's a judgment-free zone. I feel completely safe and I can speak freely. Um, and I think the most important thing that I've realised is that I'm speaking to someone who is trauma informed. And I, in the past, I think since probably speaking out about it, maybe it's been 2 years. And through this entire process, it feels different talking to somebody who is trauma informed and actually has a bit more of an awareness of what I'm going through and maybe how different things will be affecting me. So the way that I feel the difference is that I'm speaking to this person and it's not just someone nodding and saying, "That's so sad. I'm so sorry. Like, this is so unfortunate that's happened to you." It's actually understanding, and you're having a conversation, and you don't have to explain yourself necessarily. Or you have a conversation, they know how triggers work, for instance. It's something that I didn't even know about myself last month. Now I understand how triggers work. And someone who is trauma informed will approach a situation in a different way and probably be, dare I say, better in a situation to help that person. I think personally for me, I went through therapy, which was more managing symptoms. And that kind of therapy was done with someone who I didn't feel was trauma informed because of the responses or the way that we had conversations and interactions. Some of the things that they said actually upset me, but I didn't have the courage to say, I don't think, you're the professional here, but I don't think you're in the right by saying that. That's quite difficult to be um, quite in a vulnerable situation. You're being vulnerable, you're, putting everything on the table and this person said something that's upset you and you can't then be like, actually this has upset me because you don't feel that strong and confident and comfortable. By talking to someone who's trauma informed, you kind of negate or like bypass that and it feels more comfortable a bit quicker. Yeah.
So it feels like the therapy you had with someone who was symptoms management might not have been specialist in terms of not trauma informed. So maybe it's
Yes.
not about right or wrong, because I often think therapy isn't about right or wrong, but it's about what fits you. And it feels like
Yes.
actually it made you almost not silent, not be able to say, this is how I feel, this is how you make me feel. And then it
Yeah.
feels like when you've had trauma informed therapy, it's more about this is how I feel, and I can, I can share that. I often think one of the hardest things about therapy is managing it. Like, I'm going to go to this person and I'm going to spend 50-60 minutes at this person's place and I'm going to talk about this, then I'm going to have to wrap it all back up and pack it all away to go
Yes.
away and then be okay for another week.
Oh goodness, yes. Yeah, I think you kind of go into a session and you kind of obviously therapy is not a quick fix. It's something that takes potentially years, months, whatever it is. It's a long time. It's something that you're going to have to constantly do throughout your entire life. You therapize yourself. But these sessions in particular, you go for an hour, and there is so much in one person's life, and to go through everything well, for my case, it would take the last 24 years of my life. So it's difficult to get everything across, but it's great that I can sort of like pinpoint certain situations and relate it to other things. I think another really big downfall is how expensive it is. And I'm going to say this because I don't think people understand that when you've been through an incident like this, maybe the only way that you're going to get support is by getting compensation or by getting a payout of some sort. And that's not right. Like, I don't think that someone in my situation should have to pay for having to fix myself. Because at the end of the day, I'm having to support myself here. Like, it's not the system that's supporting me, it's me taking that proactive approach and using the money that one I work hard to get in the first place. It's almost like I'm going to give up doing snowboarding for a hobby and go to therapy instead. Like, it's a choice you have to make. So yeah, I really do think that they, as a society, like, people need to understand the impact that it has. Harsh truths is another thing that I thought was quite difficult about therapy. I think you don't necessarily always have someone who's going to be quite honest, brutally honest with you. And sometimes you need to hear that because that's the only way you're going to understand and see things from a certain perspective or a different perspective, which is sometimes what you need. Someone who's going to be completely honest is always, like I said, honesty is policy. And then also the non-linear progress. That is so tough. You can leave a session feeling so confused, or like you've opened, like you picked at a scab and it starts bleeding, and then you kind of put a plaster on it, but it doesn't necessarily stop bleeding. Whereas other times you can completely stem the flow and it'll be pretty much, you feel all right.
I think all of those are really good points, and I want to come back to the money because, I think it's been in the news quite a lot recently that I know a local rape crisis centres had £200,000 cut from their budgets, and I think in society we see this as someone else's problem to fix. The NHS do what they can, and they are symptoms management based, but they don't have specialists necessarily that are trained to deal with long term, deep rooted work that is in the sexual violence field. And it's really hard, and I find it as a therapist hard. Sometimes you walk away feeling so guilty that you have to charge for your service, and it's a real battle you have with yourself. But obviously your, as a therapist, responsibility is to keep on top of that knowledge, that research, those CPD events, making sure you're delivering for your client the best you can. But I like what you said in terms of it's not your job to get a payout or compensation. It shouldn't work that way. And I think as a society, we need to look at this differently. Someone did a study once on the actual cost of one single impact on one person of sexual violence, and it was hundreds of thousands of pounds lost in work, lost in relationships, lost in, housing, whatever it is. And I think we have to look at this in a different way. And, even if it was part funded, that would be great. Something to help, I think, is really important. And the linear flow thing, I think, is so true, because people come and they'll say to me, right, I want 12 sessions and I just want you to fix me. I'm just going to talk about this, and then by 12 sessions I'll be okay. And I like what you said, because I always say, if you had to break your trauma down into hours, the truth is we're probably going to match or not be too far off. Sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes people fly through therapy. Certainly shouldn't be with me for years and years, otherwise you're going to get stuck, and that's not my job. But equally, each therapeutic interaction is a chapter of your life, and then you might go away and do another chapter of work, so that's important. And the mirror is hard. The mirror is hard because that's what empathy provides, is that mirror that holds up to all of your bits that no one else gets to see, and then you have to look at it and go, ouch, right, what are we going to do about this? But what I think so different about therapy is that when you look in the mirror and go, ouch, you have someone else saying, but that's okay, let's go through this together. You almost need someone to hold your hand as you do that.
Yeah, it honestly feels liberating. And I mean, I I think everyone needs therapy. I'm not gonna lie. I don't think it's necessarily something that everyone has to go through, but I think just having the self-awareness to reflect and to bring up that mirror for yourself, that is therapy. It's trying to actually understand yourself and your scenario and reflect things back on you, and not just maybe project things, is very important.
Yeah, and I think, therapy is hard because people see it as a luxury. People see it as, I'm not crazy enough to need therapy. Some cultures and communities don't believe in therapy. And so it's seen as this kind of luxurious, place where you come and lie on a couch and indulge yourself. And, wouldn't that be nice?
Challenging it.
That's
It's so
hard.
difficult. I know so many people who go to therapy. I know people who've been put in therapy by their family and now they're doing really well, but their family think that therapy is now an issue because they're doing really well. It's like ugh, the view on what therapy is. I think it's so preconceived and people don't actually understand what it is at, at the heart of it. It's not let me put you in therapy, let me fix you.
Yes.
It's about holding up that mirror and being like, okay, like let's take a look at what is really going on with you and how it's affecting your life and your story. And that is, in my eyes, something that people need to understand, because then it also makes the person that's going through therapy feel like they can talk about it, because it shouldn't be a taboo thing. It shouldn't be something that I suggested it to somebody once, someone who was close to my heart, and I thought, you know what? I don't think I am in a position to help you through this particular scenario, but I do feel like you could benefit from therapy because it would, you'd probably be able to cope with certain situations easier. And their take on it was that they would be perceived in a different way at work. I think it, it was a male that I was talking to, and it then brought up the whole like, how are, and this is obviously quite generalized, how are males viewed if they do therapy?
Yes.
And obviously, a big thing that I've noticed recently is males and weakness. There's a big thing about it. I'm not the best person to articulate what I'm trying to say here, but it's almost like you're perceived to be weak if you do therapy, and that's men, women, anyone. Like absolutely anybody in this world who went through any therapy, it almost seems like there is a preconceived idea of what that therapy is or who you are as a person, not able to cope too much. Like, yeah, there's so much that people need to understand about what this is.
I've never really understood why people will go and take antidepressants, and there is a place for antidepressants. I'm not demonising them when I say this, but I'll
Yeah.
take antidepressants and that's okay, but seeing a therapist is a taboo. And it's a bit
Yes.
like, I don't really understand.
Yes,
Like
yes,
taking a
yes.
tablet is okay, but talking to a person about your experience isn't. And I think society wise, we have to get better at saying and normalising this process and saying, look, if your arm's hanging off because you've got a broken arm, you go and see a specific doctor. If you've got cancer, you see an oncologist. If you've got mental health concerns, why can't you see a therapist? And by the way, mental health is such a spectrum. I think we all experience it at different times. And then when you have things like this happen, especially sexual violence, where, to me, it's just one of those things that no one can ever preempt, no one can ever know they're going to go through, no one can ever guess. And so it feels hard that when you've been through enough and you've had every choice and control sense taken away, society still tries to control your response to therapy, which is crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the points that you mentioned there about obviously taking tablets and therapy. So, what mental health or ill mental health is a chemical imbalance. At its root core, it's a chemical imbalance. And yes, you can solve it with tablets, like you say, but also there are ways of doing it holistically, and that is through therapy. And you can naturally, without having these medications, you can actually balance the chemicals back out again to a point where you are balanced. And that is the goal, for everyone to be balanced. And it's not quite sure where I was going that, but yeah.
It's okay. I think there's lots of schools of thought on whether it's chemical imbalance, whether it's genetic, whether it's reactive. There's lots of work being done on like kind of anti-pathologizing trauma and looking at trauma symptoms. And I think that the truth is, it's what works for you. And I'm very pro-choice, but I think it should be a choice, and we shouldn't be making anyone feel less than or different because they choose something different to the next person. And so, I think all in all, I think that a good therapist doesn't keep you stuck. They want to support and help you. They want to encourage you to see your progress and actually that's the thing I would encourage people to do with therapy is review yourself. Do you feel better? Has there been progress? Do you feel stuck? Do you feel like you're getting your point across? Do you feel your therapist understands you? And it's like any
Yes.
relationship, it needs that honest reflection and work, and your therapist isn't always going to get it right. We are human too, apparently. We are
Yes.
somewhere. So we do get it wrong. But it's having that confidence to say, I think you shared some really good things that have happened along the way. Have you got anything that specifically helped you in your journey or that you want to share with others to help them?
I think I'm at a point in my journey now where I've realised that it's about me. It's not about anybody else in this world, it's about me. And at the end of the day, my goal in life is to be successful, and that success to me is happiness. And it sounds so cliche, like I can already hear it. But the only way that I'm going to achieve that is by working on myself. And I think that I have taken the steps now. I've been through a few huge changes. That's been like an entire new job change. I've been through a relationship change. I've been through moving back home with my parents. That in itself, like, that's a lot. It's a lot to deal with. But the way that I have found it best to deal with is by looking at me and how am I coping? What can I do in this situation? Who am I as a person? And that's really important. You've got to understand who you are as a person, because everyone's got this strength and resilience inside of them, but it's about looking at yourself and not doing it because other people want you to do it. I think people are, especially in what I've been through recently, people have been like the pivotal point of me being able to go from one place to the next. So going from being in my first job to getting myself to the next job. You know, it's that networking, it's that people process. It's the people around me. Who do I keep in my circle? My family, my friends, all of those people are so supportive and love me and, you know, will always have my backs. And that, obviously, for me, I'm very, very lucky and I can see that. I am grateful for that. And I remind myself of all of these things each day and make sure I don't take it for granted, and then make sure that I then reflect and think, okay, so this is good for me. What else can I look at? Or what areas of my life have I maybe neglected, or maybe I could work on? Spend time with yourself, understand yourself, be more self aware, educate yourself. Because at the end of the day, education is out there. We've got so much great technology. I deleted my Instagram, which honestly feels so liberating. It's such an alien world when you haven't got this Instagram account where you're sharing with like thousands of people what you're doing each day, or looking at what thousands of people are doing each day. You just have yourself in your own world, and at the end of the day, that's all that matters, really. So I don't know, that's just me. So the support with people, the resources that were made available to me, um the time that people gave me, or are giving me, the care, um, obviously the money side of things. Like I said before, I'm having to fight for my cause, fight for my case, fight for my life, um, and I want other people to understand that it's possible. It's entirely possible. Everyone's got this fire inside of them. They just maybe need something to ignite it and fight for themselves. Um, and yeah, looking inwards is the most important thing that I've learned recently.
I think your faith in people and your trust in them, despite what's happened to you, is incredible and reflects that inner strength, because it can be so hard when these things happen to trust and reach out. And I think spending time with yourself is always the answer. Sometimes it feels unachievable, but I think it's like anything, it takes time to get there. And I'm a
Yeah.
big believer in restrict social media. It can be helpful, but it can also be harmful. And those
Yeah.
things are proactive to keep you, safe and supported. I just
It's
want to say a huge thank you. I think I've just loved talking to you today. And I think what you shared will help so many people. So thank you
yeah.
for sharing your story. And yeah, thank you. And is there anything else you want to say before I end?
I just want to reassure people that it's not that scary. Once the ball gets rolling, people are, at the end of the day, people just want to see you happy. that at the core of all of us human beings, we just want to be happy, and you just got to find the right people to support you and get you to that place. Yeah, that's all I want to say, really.
Oh, thank you. It's been so lovely to talk to you.
And you, thank you.
Thank you for listening. I hope that has helped some people make sense of their journey and experience. I'm really grateful for my clients for being able to share so articulately their experiences. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for part 2, which will be released tomorrow. Take care and bye for now.